Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We still have people who are actively joining the meeting, and we're just going to give them a few more minutes to settle in before we get started. Thank you. Hello again, everyone. So it's now 7:05, and we are just confirming that our YouTube live stream is active, and we will get started as soon as we get that confirmation. Thank you. Okay, we are going to go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for joining us. Hi, everyone. My name is Eric Botsford, and I'm the director of the Manhattan office here at the New York City Department of City Planning. I want to thank you so much for taking time from your evening to join us for this public kickoff meeting for the Midtown South Mixed Use Plan, or MSMX for short. We're excited to be here with you as we begin the public engagement process. Before we begin, I'd like to extend a welcome to Councilmember Keith Powers, who is with us tonight, and we really appreciate your participation and partnership in this process. We'll hear from Councilmember Powers and Councilmember Botcher, as well as a member of the Borough President's office shortly. The Midtown South Mixed Use Plan seeks to lay the groundwork for vibrant and active neighborhoods in Midtown South, where housing will coexist with offices, the creative industry, and other uses. We're at the very early stages of this planning process, and I want to emphasize that we aren't here tonight with a specific proposal or recommendations. Instead, we're very much in learning and listening mode. Tonight, we'll share with you what we've learned thus far from our initial work, and also look forward to hearing from you. We'll strive to answer all of your questions tonight, However, because we're at the start of this process, we may not have every answer tonight, but you'll see everything from tonight, including the presentation, our questions, and your questions and our responses on our website, which will update continuously throughout the planning process. I'll now hand it over to my colleagues from the MSMX team to walk us through tonight's program. Aska?
Thank you, Eric, for the introduction. Hi, everyone. My name is Aska Mahedin. I'm a planner here at the Department of City Planning. To start, I'd like to briefly explain the meeting format today. So in the next hour and a half, the MSMX team, supported by many colleagues that are working in the background, will be sharing some information on the MSMX plan. To foster a robust public dialogue, our goal is to go through a presentation in the first 30 minutes or so and dedicate the rest of the time to listening to you all and answering your questions. At any time during the event, you may submit your questions in writing using the Zoom Q&A feature. My colleagues will be monitoring these questions live throughout the event. After the presentation, you may raise your hand if you wish to speak or ask questions live. In order to be inclusive and respectful of different preferences and comfort levels, we will alternate between answering questions live and those that we receive during in the Q&A feature. Here's an overview of this evening's agenda. We'll begin with opening remarks from the City Planning's director and the local elected officials. We'll then introduce the plan's objectives, provide important context of why we're working on a new plan for Midtown South, discuss what we know so far, explain the community planning process, and then open the floor to your comments and questions. Lastly, we'll conclude with next steps and how to stay involved in the planning effort. Additionally, for anyone who cannot stay until the end, a recording of this meeting will be posted to the Department of City Planning's YouTube page and on the MSMX website at MidtownSouthPlan.nyc. Now, I would like to hand things over to some special guests who have joined us this evening.
All right, Aska, that's my cue, I think. All right, hello, everybody. I'm Dan Gorodnick. I'm the director of the Department of City Planning, and I wanted to thank you all so much for attending this remote kickoff meeting for the Midtown South mixed-use plan. We really appreciate your spending a part of your evening with us tonight. As you all know, Midtown South is one of the most centrally located neighborhoods in New York City. It's an amenity and transit-rich area that has been a jobs hub going back for generations. But despite those advantages, Midtown South also faces the challenges of changing work patterns, including companies switching to hybrid or remote work formats, and an aging building stock. And on top of those challenges, our outdated zoning rules generally do not even permit housing in this community, which prevents New Yorkers from living close to their jobs. So it's time for us to change that through this process and through the Midtown South mixed-use plan. This initiative is focused on creating a vibrant 24/7 mixed-use community in this part of Manhattan, one where New Yorkers have access to new housing, including permanently income-restricted housing, a great mix of jobs, and an excellent quality of life. With these goals in mind, we can chart a path to Midtown South's long-term success. But in order for us to create this bright future for Midtown South, we're going to need your help. We want to learn from you and understand the needs of this community. So I really want to encourage everybody who is here and who might view this recording in the future to get involved, and would remind everyone, as Eric did at the top, that this is just the beginning of the conversation. In the coming months, we plan to hold additional public events. We're going to start doing office hours so you can meet directly with the city planning team and discuss your goals, your ideas, your questions. And all of the information about upcoming events will be listed on MidtownSouthPlan.nyc, MidtownSouthPlan.nyc. I encourage you to fill out the survey that we have, sign up for our mailing list there too, so you can stay up to date on our next steps. Once we come up with this community-informed proposal over the course of the next year, we will review it with all of you, with our partner agencies, and with decision makers to finalize a plan that aligns with the goals that we have all shaped together. So to close, I want to really thank the elected officials who are so fundamentally critical to this ongoing work. We've got Councilman Keith Powers with us right now. So Keith, thank you, Councilman. We really appreciate you, your advocacy. On behalf of the borough president, who you're going to hear from in a minute, you have Lizette Chaparro. Lizette, thank you. The borough president has been a great champion of this and for housing across the borough. We really appreciate him and you. And the council member, Eric Botcher, who will be joining us a little later in the evening, who also has been a great advocate for thoughtful change in this part of Manhattan. It's thanks to all of you, your leadership and support, that we are able to advance this vital planning effort. This is a process. It involves all of us together. It's critically important that we're standing together here, even at this very, very early stage. I also want to thank the incredible and dedicated Department of City Planning staff and team for your work. Some of them you're going to see tonight, some of them you're not going to see tonight, but they're also present. They're in the background. Thanks to all of you for all of your efforts in moving this process forward. So with that, I hope you enjoyed tonight, learn a lot from today's presentation and the Q&A. We look forward to discussing how we can best work together toward a more dynamic and revitalized Midtown South. And with that, I have the great pleasure of introducing to you my good friend and councilman for a good part of this area that we're talking about here, Councilman Keith Powers. Floor is yours, Councilman.
Thank you. Nice to see everyone and good evening. And thank you. We have a great attendance here tonight. So thanks everyone for joining in. Really excited to be here for kickoff of what we think will be a transformative rezoning for Midtown South, but essential to the entire city here. And I want to thank City Planning Chair Dan Garodnick, the borough president, my colleague Eric Botcher. I think you'll be hearing from some of them, and our community boards and our civic associations, for which I see a number of members here as well. And I think everyone understands the last few years have really transformed our work patterns and our commercial space. It's great to see that people are returning to the offices and we're staging a recovery from the last few years. But we also understand that we have challenges here and that we need to address, and an opportunity to match a problem with a solution here. We have older commercial buildings that are struggling to bring back workers and sign new leases. We also have an opportunity to transform and revitalize a neighborhood, which is what we're here to do today. The areas being studied here, Midtown South, is home to a lot of older commercial buildings that are struggling, many that are very, very old and have been, this neighborhood has changed many times since we first built many of those buildings. And of course, want to adapt and reform zoning to meet the moment that we're in right now. We have an opportunity to create a vibrant 24/7 neighborhood here, rich in job opportunities, transit, culture, and hopefully housing in the future. And we are, as many folks know and discussed, challenged here in the city overall with creating the housing that we need to meet the high demand. So this is what we're here for. The well-reported high cost of living in Manhattan means we also have to, we really have to meet with more supply here. And we want to unlock potential and to generate what we think could be tens of thousands of new apartments. If done right, it will be a win-win. I think that will help us address that housing need while also providing a second life to the buildings here and to open the door up to a very creative solution. So we are all here at the very beginning of this process to hear from community members and to understand what the needs and what the desires here are, but want to also ask folks to kind of maintain an open mind about this neighborhood and to really give us meaningful input that can be used as we forge ahead. But want to stress again, this is the beginning. We are here to listen and here to hear from folks, but obviously see a big opportunity ahead. So first of all, I want to thank City Planning for putting together tonight's event and all the staff, some who are on here. I know some who couldn't make it, but are working diligently to address this issue. And this is a great opportunity for folks, many who I see from my district and our Councilmember Botcher's district to be part of that process. So thanks again. And I want to hand it back over to City Planning and to thank my colleagues for helping to make this a reality.
Thank you, Councilmember. We'll now hear from Lizette Shapiro.
Thanks, Aska. I'm Lizette Chaparro. I'm the Director of Land Use and Planning for Manhattan Borough President Mark Levine. And on behalf of our office, I want to thank the department for having this early and very thorough engagement for shaping this part of the borough. We have a really great opportunity here to take a fresh look at the zoning regulations and not only bring some much needed housing to the area, but also some more vitality. And for that effort, we really want stakeholders in the area to tell us not just about the conditions that they see on the ground today, but also to sort of envision a future along with us, everything from open spaces to street design, pedestrian flows, the arts, really everything. And that's what tonight and what this engagement process is about. So our office encourages everyone to participate tonight, to take DCP survey, go to office hours, and stay tuned as we continue to work on this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you all for your really warm welcome and statements of support. We're also expected to be joined by Councilmember Botcher sometime tonight, and when he joins us, we'll hear some from him as well. We're really happy you're able to join today. So let's now go over who we are and what we do here at City Planning and get into context of why we're launching this plan. Through its many initiatives and collaborations, the Department of City Planning, or DCP, promotes housing production and affordability, fosters economic development and coordinated investments in infrastructure and services, and supports resilient, sustainable communities across the 5 boroughs for a more equitable New York City. Our MSMX team within the Manhattan office includes our director and deputy director, team leaders, and city planners, and our near urban designers. We also have a deep bench of agency staff contributing to the plan's development and its public engagement process who have made this kickoff possible. So you may be wondering what the MSX plan is and what it's trying to do. At a very high level, the plan seeks to foster 24/7 mixed-use neighborhoods within the 42 blocks of the Midtown South plan area. We are looking to create new opportunities for housing, including affordable housing, while also aiming to support and grow the diverse economic sectors that already exist in the neighborhoods today. And of course, our goal is to address and help improve quality of life in the area by creating the conditions for active street life and public spaces. So why are we developing this plan and why now? As we've all seen, the COVID-19 pandemic has reshaped the way many New Yorkers work, commute, and shop. And in turn, these trends have impacted the commercial office market. Hybrid work options have resulted in decreased office demand, and older or more outdated commercial buildings are struggling to attract tenants as employers seek amenity-rich, commute-worthy buildings. Today, Manhattan office availability rates hover around 19%, which is nearly double what they were in 2019. But despite these recent trends, New York City has seen tremendous job growth over the last 20 years. But housing production has not kept pace with the city's growing population. The little housing growth that we've seen, particularly new affordable housing, has been concentrated in relatively few neighborhoods. Our housing shortage has many human costs that are felt every day by New Yorkers. Some consequences of a tight housing market include high rents, tenant harassment, poor housing quality, and displacement pressures. Not having enough homes is also a direct cause of homelessness. This further worsens the neighborhood-based legacies of segregation, discrimination, and concentrated poverty that have led to inequity, where neighborhoods have unequal access to resources and opportunities. Now let's go over what the department is doing to address this crisis. Where We Live, New York City, a report originally released in 2018, outlines the city's fair housing plan and provides a number of strategies for adding new housing in neighborhoods where there is a substantial opportunity to create new homes. In addition, the city is in the process of putting forward its 3rd citywide City of Yes initiative, zoning for housing opportunity. This is the biggest pro-housing change the department has ever undertaken and will be updating the zoning to enable a little more housing in every neighborhood in the city. It will expand flexibility for conversion of non-residential buildings into housing and promote mixed-use transit-oriented neighborhoods. City of Yes for Housing Opportunity will enter public review in 2024, so stay tuned for updates and public engagement. However, these initiatives can't bring housing in Midtown South because today's half-century-old zoning rules do not permit housing in these areas. It is time to undo the barriers holding back housing opportunity and give New Yorkers more housing choice. This is where the Midtown South mixed-use plan comes in. It seeks to foster vibrant 24/7 mixed-use neighborhoods by creating housing opportunities, supporting economic activity, and creating conditions for improved quality of life. I will now hand it over to my colleague, Andy Cantu, to provide some background information on the plan.
Thanks, Aska. So for the next part of this presentation, I'll just walk through an overview of the plan area, where we are spatially, talk about the existing conditions, and then touch on housing and the economy. So the plan area you see in front of you contains approximately 42 blocks, all are parts of 42 blocks, in these 4 non-contiguous areas in Midtown South. These areas really sit in the middle of what is quite possibly the most transit-dense part of the entire country. You've got access to 15 subway lines, the Long Island Railroad, New Jersey Transit, and Amtrak at Penn Station. The majority of the plan area is located in Manhattan Community Board 5, except some small portions along the western edge, which are in CD4. And as part of the new City Council district maps, the Northeast area is in District 4, represented by Councilmember Powers, who you just heard from, and the other 3 areas are in Council District 3, represented by Councilmember Eric Botcher. And I'll go ahead and walk through each of these areas individually. So the Northwest area, shown here just north of Penn Station and south of Times Square, generally bounded by 40th Street to the north, Broadway to the east, 35th Street to the south, and 8th Avenue to the west. The Northeast area, just south of the New York Public Library main branch and Bryant Park, consists of the mid-blocks between 39th Street to the north, 5th Avenue to the east, 35th Street to the south, and 6th Avenue to the west. The Southeast area, which is bisected by Broadway, is bounded by 31st Street to the north, 5th Avenue to the east, 23rd Street to the south, and 6th Avenue to the west. And the Southeast area contains the only city-designated historic districts within the MSMX plan area, the Madison Square North Historic District and the Ladies Mile Historic District, which are shaded in purple. And finally, the Southwest area, extending from 31st Street to the north, 23rd Street to the south, between 6th Avenue to the east and 8th Avenue to the west. This area has a really rich history dating back all the way to the early 1800s, but most of the buildings we see today were built in the early 20th century, what was really considered the neighborhood's sort of architectural heyday. And the opening of Penn Station, the original Penn Station in 1910, and Grand Central in 1913, and the subways around the same time, really dramatically accelerated the area's transformation from what was primarily an entertainment and residential neighborhood into what became the city's primary manufacturing and warehousing hub. And in the years immediately before World War II, garment manufacturing, wholesale, retail, and all of those related trades became the city's largest industry by far. And the economic impact of the apparel sector led to a boom in the construction of many mid and high-rise mercantile loft buildings that you see today, which were really designed to house all aspects of the garment industry, including factories, office space, showrooms, and the like. But following the war, because of changes in transportation and spatial needs and larger macroeconomic shifts like automation and offshoring, the number of manufacturing and other businesses in New York City declined significantly, with the garment industry being hit particularly hard. And we'll discuss these economic changes in greater detail later. A little bit of an introduction to zoning for those who aren't as familiar. Zoning rules typically divide the city into 3 general types of zones: residential, commercial, and manufacturing. These zones have specific rules for what can be built, so both the use and the form of buildings, and also how intensely that land can be used. So floor area ratio, or FAR, is our standard measure of intensity or density, and is calculated by dividing the total floor area of a building by the area of the lot. So the higher the FAR, the greater the density. And M1 manufacturing zones, which is what the MSMX plan area is zoned, are usually mapped in areas designated for light industrial or commercial activity, and are typically sort of a transition zone between areas where housing is permitted and heavier industrial zones that may be incompatible with housing. And even though standard M1 districts don't allow residential use as of right, there are mixed-use districts shaded in dark purple on the map where light industrial and housing are both permitted. Light purple areas are manufacturing zones that currently don't allow any housing, and the MSMX plan area is one of the last vestiges of these purely manufacturing zones in Midtown. So M16 districts are 10 FAR zones, which is the highest density M district we currently have. And M16 allows most commercial and light industrial uses like warehouses, retail, offices, entertainment venues, and manufacturing that doesn't have any sort of noxious spillover effects. Some of the uses that aren't allowed include things like housing, community facilities like schools, libraries, museums, and high-intensity industrial uses. Most of the MSMX plan area, shown in dark purple, was zoned M16 decades ago. There's a small portion of the Southwest, shown in blue, that was recently rezoned in 2011 to M16D, which is pretty similar to M16, except that it allows housing on smaller lots, but prioritizes non-residential uses and jobs on lots over 40,000 square feet. And then the areas in red and yellow in and around the plan area are high density commercial and residential districts that generally permit housing and are much more mixed use in character. The existing buildings in the area are really reflective of the neighborhood's history as a center for light industry and commerce. There are very few undeveloped sites here. The vast majority of the buildings were constructed before the current 1961 zoning resolution. And because of that, about half of the buildings are much larger than what today's zoning rules would allow. Almost all of the commercial space is either Class B or Class C, which generally have lower asking rents and tend to attract businesses and other organizations looking for affordable space, but it's still centrally located. We know that in the wake of COVID, vacancy rates have been trending up citywide, as was mentioned previously, and this neighborhood is really no exception. Because of the age of the buildings and the physical characteristics that make the older lofts easier to retrofit, there could be really a significant opportunity for conversion to housing with any potential zoning changes. So because of its history as an industrial and office district and the restrictive zoning that doesn't permit housing, there are relatively few homes here, only about 2,300 units total compared to around 74,000 homes within a 10-minute walk. And this is despite being one of the most well-connected and jobs-dense areas of the entire city. The homes that do exist are the result of variances granted by the Board of Standards and Appeals, homes that have been approved or undergoing legalization under the state's loft law, or homes that existed before zoning was put in place. A key tool at the city's disposal to create more affordable housing is the Mandatory Inclusionary Housing Program, or MIH, which requires that a percentage of new rental housing be income restricted in areas where zoning changes permit those higher residential densities. And on your right is a map showing the MIH areas. So even though there are, a few hundred rent stabilized homes in the plan area, the only income restricted housing in the plan area is in those two blocks that I mentioned in the M16D in the Southwest, where about 200 income restricted homes have been created under the optional inclusionary housing program since 2011. The MSMX plan really has the potential to unlock a lot of new housing opportunity in an area where housing has either been prohibited historically or allowed under very, very limited circumstances. And any zoning change to allow housing here will enable us to map MIH in Midtown South for the first time. Turning for a second to the economy, there are approximately 135,000 jobs and over 7,000 businesses in the MSMX area. And this employment density is really comparable to what we consider sort of the core Midtown office districts to the north. It's very jobs dense. And while jobs in traditional manufacturing and wholesale have declined sharply over the years, mostly due to changes in the fashion industry, they've largely been replaced by office-based jobs, with media and tech growing at the fastest rates. And these trends, again, mirror broader city and countrywide patterns of a shift towards a more service-oriented economy, although, of course, the effects on the ground here have been particularly stark. So I'm going to pass it back off to Asuka, who's going to talk about each area in more detail.
Thanks, Andy. So we want to leave as much time as possible for everyone's questions and comments. So I will be brief on the individual area information, but all of the facts that are here will be available to you on our website once we post this presentation. So the Northwest area is zoned M15 and encompasses most of the Special Garment Center District. The land use here is mostly commercial uses such as offices, hotels, and retail, and some light industrial and manufacturing uses as well. However, no new housing is permitted, and the area only provides about 55 homes out of the planned area's total of around 2,300 homes. The Northwest has the highest concentration of jobs in the MSMX planned area at around 65,000 jobs and over 3,400 businesses. Due to its overlap with the garment district, the fashion sector still has a strong presence here, but the area has seen an overall decline in fashion jobs as other industries have grown. Changing work and production patterns have resulted in a faster decline in manufacturing jobs than wholesale, but both are seeing decline. At the same time, we are seeing a strong growth in office-based jobs. Most of these jobs are in the information and professional and business services industries, leading to growth in creative and tech sectors. Similar to the Northwest, the Northeast area is also zoned M16, and no new housing is permitted. There are around 190 existing homes in this area. The land use is mostly commercial as well and includes things like offices and hotels. It has around 17,000 jobs and 1,100 businesses, with professional and business services industry making up the largest portion of those jobs. Within the manufacturing and logistics industry, most of these jobs are concentrated in the wholesale sector, which has seen a 14% decline since 2012. The Southeast area is zoned M16 as well, with no new housing permitted. There are around 423 existing homes here, which is more than the two northern areas combined. The Southeast has around 16,000 jobs, the lowest in the planned area, and around 1,250 businesses. Of note, it has the highest growth and concentration of leisure and hospitality industry, which includes accommodation and food service jobs. The Southwest area zoning is split between M16, which does not permit new housing, and M16D, which allows limited housing, but prioritizes non-residential uses on larger lots. Due in large part to its more permissive zoning, the Southwest has the highest number of homes of all the planned area. There are around 1,630 homes here, which make up about 70% of the total 2,300 homes in the MSMX area. The Southwest has around 37,000 jobs and over 1,900 businesses. Most of these jobs tend to be office-based in professional and business services industry, and the area has also seen a modest growth in jobs, and that's particularly due to the growth in the information industry. Leisure and hospitality is also a growing industry here. So in summary, here's what we know about the Midtown South plan area. It is arguably the most transit-rich place in the entire city. So people and businesses naturally gravitate towards this area and want to be here. The area's buildings are older than Midtown as a whole, and there are relatively few opportunities for new ground of development. There are comparatively few residents here, especially within the planned area when compared to the surrounding area. This results in a noticeable drop-off in activity and street life after work hours and on weekends. Since housing is generally not permitted, makes it a really great place to explore housing opportunities and introducing affordable housing. We've seen that because of its location, lower rents, and favorable zoning, the area is also home to small businesses trying to gain a foothold in Manhattan to establish themselves and grow, and certain industries and nonprofits who have few options in terms of where they can locate affordably. Despite certain characterizations of the area as being somewhat distressed, it has a dense concentration of jobs, and the job market has shown impressive resilience. And lastly, the plan area isn't a monolith. Each of the 4 areas is different when it comes to its employment trends, the built character, and residential population, among other things, which may result in a more targeted approach to planning interventions. So let's take a step back now and talk about DCP's community planning process, which consists of 4 phases: organize, learn, create, and share. The process begins by briefing our partner agencies and developing an engagement plan before we begin to build an understanding of area trends and assess opportunities for the future. We do this by looking at existing data and learning from community members' lived experiences and the experiences of local groups and organizations. Based on this understanding, we can then form recommendations to address key community priorities and work with the community to refine those recommendations. And finally, DCP uses these recommendations to inform policy and investment. This is where we develop and share the neighborhood plan and create a pathway for implementation. So where is the MSX plan in the community planning process? This kickoff tonight marks the beginning of the public engagement efforts for the MSMX plan. We are using many different formats and tools to get meaningful feedback for the plan through the end of 2023 and beginning of 2024. There will be a series of stakeholder roundtables to learn from organizations, people, and businesses involved on the ground in these areas. At the same time, we will also be using a variety of digital tools to continue to engage with the public and local community. We want to continue to hear from you about your priorities and ensure that your questions are answered. Right now, we have an online survey on our website that we encourage you all to fill out. Again, the website is MidtownSouthPlan.nyc. This interactive site is where you will be able to continue to engage with us. We will be posting more information there soon, including links to this presentation and a recording of this event. You can also use our website to contact us and subscribe to receive periodic updates. We will also be holding public office hours where anyone can sign up to have a small group conversation with members of the MSMX project team. This is another opportunity to ask questions, give comments, and learn more. Office hours will be scheduled semi-regularly and will be able to sign up to attend via our website, so stay tuned for updates on that. Again, we encourage you to subscribe on the website to receive updates so you know when the office hours are available and you can sign up. Following all of this engagement, DCP will craft and share a community priorities document. The community priorities features everything that DCP has learned and heard during this process, and it will inform our MSMX plan. We will then take that community feedback and use it to help draft recommendations for the MSMX plan. Those draft recommendations will be shared at a public town hall meeting where the public will be able to comment and ask questions. With the feedback from the town hall, the proposal will be refined further and a draft plan will be finalized and shared at a public information session where, again, the public will be able to comment and ask questions. This feedback will help us further refine the plan before it gets through the formal public review process. This concludes the presentation portion of tonight's event. I'll now turn over to Abby Ryder, who will moderate the comments and questions portion.
Thanks, Ozka. All right, as we get started with receiving your comments and answering your questions, I've got some general guidance to share so we can make sure that this conversation is a pleasant experience for all. To that end, just note that all participants will remain muted unless called on. You can indicate that you wish to speak by using the raise your hand feature on Zoom, and we will call you in order. Please be respectful of everyone and keep your comments and questions brief so that we can hear from as many people as possible. I'm also going to repeat what Eric mentioned in his opening remarks, which is that right now we're at the beginning of the community planning process, and therefore we might not be able to answer some of your questions. However, your comments and questions today, as well as input in the months to come, will continue to help shape the MSMX plan. If you'd rather type than speak, please take advantage of the Q&A feature on Zoom. We are monitoring anything you submit here live. And finally, if you feel your question was not answered during the event, you can always send an email for further information to Midtown South Plan.nyc.gov. Just very quickly, I'm going to go over the different options you have to comment or ask your question. For those dialing in at the phone numbers listed at the bottom of the screen, you can press *9 to raise your hand. I see a few raised hands, and we have a lot of written questions submitted via the Q&A feature. So here's how this is going to work. I'm going to alternate between calling on a couple of folks who have their hands raised, and then I'm going to read a few written questions that we have from participants in the Q&A box, and we'll continue to switch back and forth from there. Just so you're aware, we're grouping similar questions together so that we can answer as many people as possible. If you have raised your hand, I will be calling your name or the last 3 digits of your phone number for those dialing in to let you know that you will be promoted to panelist, so you can unmute yourself and turn on your camera if you'd like. Please note that after you're promoted in our system, it may seem for a couple of seconds on screen as if you've been kicked out of the Zoom call. Don't panic. Very quickly, the Zoom box will reappear. You may have to click a button to accept the promotion, and after that, you'll be able to turn on your camera and mic to speak. All right, so I'm going to get started again with a few folks who have their hands raised. The first 2 are going to be David Gordon and Andrew Stern. So let's start with David now. And this may take a moment for David to come online. David, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Okay, perfect. I just wanted to give a quick comment, but first I want to thank everyone from DCP as well as the elected officials for being here. This is a really important rezoning. We're in the middle of a generational housing crisis. And so to the extent that we can take an advantage of an area like this that I think right now is frankly underutilized, despite what some people may say, to build more housing and to bring more people to Manhattan and alleviate whatever we can out of the housing crisis, that is fantastic. So again, I want to thank everyone for being here. My comment tonight is mostly about, I want to stress the importance of just maximizing housing within this process and what can be available. I work in this area. I, in fact, work in the northwest quadrant of areas that are being outlined for the mixed use. And, you know, I have a pretty high rent right now. I pay over 50% of my income in rent living here on the Lower East Side. If I had the opportunity to live right next to where I work for a lower rent, that would be fantastic. I want to emphasize that any flexibility we have in office conversions, I would really want to encourage people to push that forward. I know every day when I get off of the subway that there are tons of homeless people who could really benefit from an office conversion type of housing opportunity that might lend itself more towards like an SRO or something that is best for the people on the lowest income or in need of the most support. I also want to say that, like, having worked here, I know that all of the businesses in the areas would immensely benefit, mostly from the new customers that would come from housing. So to the extent that we're adding new uses and deliberating what types of things could go here, I really think that for the local businesses, the best thing would just be more people and more people who can be housed right near everything that's there. And lastly, I'll say that to the extent that people have concerns about crime, I really think that one of the best solutions to that is to have a vibrant neighborhood with a lot of people around, and that people can, that it's like a 24-hour neighborhood and there's always going to be people out and everything. I think that's one of the best deterrents, not just to crime, but basically any antisocial behavior. So once again, I just want to say thank you and put my voice in there for maximal amount of housing that can come of this.
Thank you so much for those comments, and really appreciate your perspective as someone who works in this community and would ideally like to live close to your work. And when it comes to the goal of maximizing housing, I think as you saw in this presentation, housing is really one of the pillars of this plan and planning process, and finding opportunities for housing where 50-plus-year-old zoning prohibits it is really key to addressing our housing crisis. This administration is really leaving no stone unturned when it comes to finding opportunities for housing, and this this really is one that is very much in line with our priorities, and it sounds like your priorities as well. Getting housing and permanent income restricted affordable housing close to transit, close to jobs, is something that is we think very important to addressing the housing crisis. And as we move through this planning process, exploring housing opportunities here is going to be a real key component of this plan. So thank you very much for your comment.
Great. Thank you, David, and thank you, Eric. Next up, we have Andrew Stern. And again, this may take a moment for Andrew to be promoted. Andrew, are you able to speak now?
Yeah, I am.
Great. Go ahead.
Cool. Thank you so much. I just wanted to start off by thanking DCP and Councilmember Powers and Councilmember Botcher for joining us here today. I also want to speak in strong support of the plan. I am incredibly excited at the prospect of adding much needed housing in one of the most transit-rich areas in the world. It's amazing to me that one of our most transit-dense areas has only 2,000 homes, and it's incredibly important that we build as much housing as we can in such a valuable and important area of our city. I'm wondering how DCP is planning to allow new buildings on underutilized land to contain as many apartments as possible. In particular, I was wondering whether there are considerations as to the bulk and FAR matching the historic office buildings and manufacturing buildings of the area. I was also wondering if DCP might be open to zoning that is responsive to future state action. For instance, if the state lifts the FAR cap in the future, would that allow us to convert office buildings with an FAR of greater than 12? And is there a way to avoid having to rezone down the line if the state should make those changes? I also know that some may have concerns about crime in the area, and I was wondering how DCP is planning to make Midtown South more of a 24-hour neighborhood, which, as David explained, can also have a positive impact on reducing crime. Thank you so much for hosting this, and I hope we build as much housing as possible. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, those comments, and also your questions. Starting first with your question regarding residential housing density that matches the existing built context. For those who are not aware and may not be aware or completely familiar with this issue, the greatest density that housing can currently be built to in New York City is 12 FAR. It's our highest density that is permitted. Parts of the city allow non-housing density to be built substantially larger than that. So there is a bit of a mismatch between how much housing, the maximum amount of housing you're allowed to build in the city versus the maximum size of an office building, for example, you can build in the city. As part of the state's housing plan that was considered recently, there was a component of that would have sought to lift that cap on residential density so that you could build more housing, larger housing buildings within the city. The state housing plan was not successful, and that housing cap does remain in place. As you saw in the presentation today, these neighborhoods, Midtown South, are built with many very, very large buildings that well exceed 12 FAR, that maximum amount that you can build for housing in the city. And some of these buildings provide good opportunities, perhaps for residential conversions, which I believe you were referring to. If housing is eventually permitted to be located within these neighborhoods, if the zoning is changed to permit that, those existing buildings could potentially convert to housing beyond the 12 FAR. An existing building that's built beyond 12 FAR could convert to housing simply by virtue of allowing housing in these neighborhoods through a zoning change. Now, a new construction building a new building from the ground up would still be subject to that 12 FAR cap and would require state action to allow a larger amount of housing to be constructed. I don't want to speculate on what the state may do. That's a completely separate process from this planning process here. And we would have to evaluate whatever proposal the state advances via legislation and determine if it is something that could be pursued in this neighborhood. But I think it is a very fair point that that you make, that you do have many buildings in the neighborhood today that are built to greater than that 12 FAR. That is the context of the neighborhood today, and then it's an important thing that we do look at when we're engaged in the planning process is what's there today and how does that inform what could and should come in the future. You asked if also if there was a way in which we could enable that to happen without zoning action, and again, I think we would really have to see what the state pursues before we could say how the city would respond. I'll note that there is no zoning district in our toolkit today in the city that allows housing beyond that 12 FAR. And when it comes to how we foster 24-hour communities, which you highlighted, I think that as we've outlined today, a real key component of that is to take neighborhoods that today only allow a certain subset of uses, office, manufacturing, for example, and broadening that, introducing housing into these neighborhoods, creating true mixed use communities where you have people who live here 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's a really key way that you could bring life to the streets beyond normal work hours, and also bring the types of businesses that support local residents and enliven our streets beyond normal work hours as well. So thank you very much for your question.
Great. Thanks, Eric, for all of that information. We're going to switch now to some of our written questions from the Q&A box. The first one is from Miles Mitchell asking, how long is this process expected to take from planning to final approval?
Thanks, Abby, and thanks, Miles, for your question. I'm Nabila Malik. I'm the Deputy Director of the Manhattan office. And as Asuka outlined in the presentation related to engagement, we sort of have this robust engagement process that we're in starting from today, and we'll go through 2024, where we will eventually present a draft plan at a public information session, and following that, we will begin the ULURP process. And so final approval will most likely occur in 2025. So in the meantime, we encourage you all to remain engaged and involved and attend our upcoming events and public office hours to continue to contribute to the conversation and share your comments and priorities.
Great, thanks, Nabila. The next comment actually we have is from Jonathan Winters saying, please include increase in number of schools to handle increase in number of children in community or new housing.
Yeah, thank you for that comment, Jonathan. So because we have no proposal or final recommendations yet at this early stage, our focus is on hearing from and learning from the public and stakeholders in the area to inform the development of land use recommendations. But community investments are an essential part of all our neighborhood planning processes. And we will be working with all of you and the local elected officials and our stakeholder groups, as well as partner agencies on finding opportunities to bring new and improved infrastructure to Midtown South. I'll also note that once we begin the process following the draft plan, there will be an environmental review which will analyze school need. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Nabila. We're going to switch now back to our live questions with folks who have their hands raised. The next two I'm seeing, first we'll have Ben Wetzler, and after that, Sachi Takahashi Rial. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name. So if we can promote Ben now, that'd be great. And Ben, are you able to speak?
Yeah, can you hear me?
We can hear you. Go right ahead, thanks.
Hi, I wanted to first, I'm going to do kind of a comment and then a question. I promise I won't take too long. The comment I think is one to emphasize, like a lot of the previous panelists have said, the importance of maximizing the amount of new housing that can end up in the neighborhood. I always thought it was kind of bizarre that right in the middle of Manhattan, you have these kind of big rectangles where no housing is allowed. And I think it would definitely be good, especially for the businesses in the neighborhood, to have more of a kind of vibrant mix of both business and residential instead of only business buildings in the neighborhood. And so to that effect, I wanted to kind of ask, to what degree are these uses, the commercial uses and residential uses in conflict, do you think, and what can DCP do to make sure that the legacy businesses, because there are a lot of really unique and really cool, especially in the garment district area, businesses that you don't really find anywhere else in the city, can stay there even while new housing construction is happening?
Thank you so much for that question. Really drives at the heart of this entire planning process, which is how these various uses can and should coexist with one another. And the reason why we call this the Midtown South mixed use plan is really because the vision for these neighborhoods, we really believe should be one that is a mix of uses into the future. And that includes the uses that are there today that are so important, that provide so many jobs within these neighborhoods today and are really central to the identity of these neighborhoods, as well as new uses in the future. And those can include things like housing, which we've talked a lot about already, but also new types of commercial uses, new types of light manufacturing uses, and also combinations of those as well. Things like live work, buildings that contain both residences and businesses, or sometimes actual single spaces within a building where somebody might live and engage in some light manufacture or production of materials. Those kinds of novel and really future forward uses are ones that we really want to encourage here. And I think that in mixed use communities, these uses really are complementary to one another, that there isn't really an inherent conflict between those uses. And this plan, which we said is really at the very early stages, is really seeking to learn from the existing businesses, the people who work and live in these neighborhoods today, to really help us understand what is there. You highlighted legacy industries, legacy businesses in these neighborhoods, and those are really key for us to consult and to hear from in this public engagement process. And the steps that you heard for public and stakeholder engagement that are to follow this meeting are really designed for us to listen to these legacy businesses and other businesses in the neighborhood, as well as the types of businesses that would like to locate in these neighborhoods as well. So we're really looking forward to this engagement process continuing and to be able to have those conversations. And the final thing that I'll say is you heard a little bit about the City of Yes for Housing Opportunity initiative earlier in the meeting tonight. There is also another citywide planning process that this agency, the Department of City Planning, is engaged in, called the City of Yes for Economic Opportunity. And both housing opportunity and economic opportunity initiatives will really complement this planning process, because they both seek to ensure that zoning and regulation gets out of the way from allowing our economic sectors, our industries to be able to grow in the city, removing unnecessary barriers to those growth and where certain businesses may be located by removing outdated regulations. So we're really coming at this from a number of angles. And but really at its core, the goal here is to ensure that we have mixed use communities in Midtown South at the conclusion of this process.
Cool, thanks.
Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, Eric, and thanks, Ben. Next, we have Sachi Takahashi Real. If you're able to be promoted and then come off mic. And again, this takes a moment for everybody watching, so just bear with us. Sachi, are you able to speak now?
I am. Thanks for, I don't know, can y'all hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Oh, great. Thanks so much for giving me a moment to pitch in, and thank you to the department for the amazing presentation. Thank you to the elected officials that are supporting this really important plan. So my name is Sachi. I live at 34th and 6th, so I'm a resident kind of just right in the middle of the area that we're talking about. I've been living here since 2021, and since 2021, and actually, so my partner and I moved to this neighborhood because his office is in the area. So really aligned with a lot of the patterns that y'all are talking about. And from 2021 to 2022, our rent increased by over $300 a month. So we've really seen the change in we've seen the vibrance of this neighborhood, and also the effect that can have on rents. So I just wanted to I think that the slides that y'all showed about the housing crisis, the emphasis and need for housing affordability and more housing production at all levels of affordability is really important. So wanted to emphasize that. And the other thing that that I'll echo that other folks have mentioned as well is making Midtown South more welcoming, not just for folks that already live and work here, but also for folks who are unhoused or folks who are new to this country. I'd be really excited to hear more about how DCP is thinking about how how rezoning can make this neighborhood a more not just denser place for everyone to live, but in particular for folks who otherwise struggle with housing affordability. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for your comments and your questions. And it's always nice to hear from somebody who lives in the area. It's I think it's really important and telling to hear your story about your living situation in the area and the rent increases. Zoning is just one tool at our disposal. It's not the only one, and it's certainly not a tool that can solve every problem in our city, but it is a really important one to address the housing crisis in our city and the housing affordability crisis in our city, in that it is the tool that allows us to look at areas where housing is not permitted at all, such as the vast majority of Midtown South, this plan area, and to possibly open the door to housing. And it's a really important potential step that we can take here that would provide opportunity for people to live close to jobs, live close to amazing transit access. And I think if there's one thing that we've all taken from the aftermath of the pandemic is that people really do desire to reduce or eliminate their commute times, and too many people have been burdened with really extreme commute times that are inordinately expensive for people, or impact their quality of life and their ability to spend time with family or engage in pursuits outside of work. And so providing opportunities for New Yorkers to live in these central locations like Midtown South, close to good jobs in a mixed use community, again, is really central to this planning effort. And the possibility of creating more housing is another step to addressing our housing supply issue. And this isn't the only reason why housing is so expensive in New York, but we really do have a fundamental issue in our city of many more people who are seeking housing than the amount of housing that we have available. And the amount of housing that we have is not kept pace with the amount of jobs that we've created in the city, and that leads to a dramatic imbalance and really tremendous rent burden on so many New Yorkers. So providing opportunities for housing is one way in which we can address that. It's certainly not the only one. And we and our sister agencies really do come at this from a variety of angles. And regarding your question about how we can make a neighborhood like Midtown South, welcoming for all, I think a really key way that zoning can do that is by mandating permanent income restricted affordable housing through the mandatory inclusionary housing program, which, as you heard during the presentation, it's a really key tool of ours. Whenever we go in and we look at the zoning in a neighborhood, if we create opportunity for a significant amount of unlocking a significant amount of an additional housing in a community, we implement mandatory inclusionary housing, which requires a significant percentage of new housing created in the neighborhood to be permanently income restricted for New Yorkers. So thank you very much for your comments and questions.
Great. Thanks, Eric, so much. We're going to switch back now to some written questions and comments. First up, we have Scott Baker, who asked, will the existing businesses be willing or able to relocate if residential conversion forces them out?
Thanks for that question, Scott. So what I will say to that is that this is one of the reasons we want to have a robust engagement process where we will be doing these stakeholder roundtables. And we really want to hear from existing businesses in the area to ask them about their concerns and their priorities, and that is what will help us develop our future recommendations and then eventual draft plan. So that's a great question and something we hope to delve into deeper with the existing businesses here today. Thank you.
Thanks, Nabila. The next question comes from Harris Smith, who's asking, can DCP discuss their current general thoughts on possible proposed modifications to ZR 15-00 residential conversions within existing buildings to facilitate greater adaptive use in the MSMX area?
That's a great question. And city planning has been thinking about this. And it's actually part of the proposal in the citywide City of Yes for Housing Opportunity initiative. And while that initiative is separate from MSMX, it is going to be very complementary to our plan. And so one of the pieces of City of Yes for Housing Opportunity is that it proposes to allow for all non-residential buildings built before 1990 to convert to housing. So it would be modifying that section that you referenced in the zoning. And that would provide much needed flexibility for certain commercial buildings in Manhattan's Midtown South to take advantage of. So definitely encourage you to take a look at the proposals under City of Yes for Housing Opportunity, and you can learn more about that at nyc.gov/yes housing opportunity. Thank you.
Thanks, Nabila and Scott and Harris, for your questions. We're going to switch back again now to our folks with their hands raised to ask a question. The next two people I see are Renee Cafaro and Barbara Blair. So first, can we promote Renee Cafaro? Renee, can you speak?
Yes, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Wonderful. Thank you all for getting the public involved. It was a former member of Community Board 5 and have worked in city and state government for quite some time. So I'm very familiar with the process. And now I come at this from the other side of things. I am a business owner in this district. My entire supply chain and manufacturing is up and down 38th and 37th Streets as a plus size fashion brand. That part of my hook is that everything is more sustainable and more ethical because we're doing fair wage fashion that is locally made. So to someone's earlier point, would we relocate? I don't think personally this would, if I were forced out, that would really kind of change the entire landscape of my growing business. But I wanted to just, underscore, yes, housing is very, very important, especially affordable housing. I think it's very clear that we all want affordable housing. Seeing more luxury housing is not what we need in this town. But I wanted to just caution anyone to, make sure we balance with the needs of businesses. In my building, 325 West 38th Street. Also, we have people in 307, 247 West 38th, and I'm now blanking on the corner of 37th and 8th. There's another building that has a sewing room that I work with as well. I'm up and down these streets every day, and there's hundreds of businesses that are thriving. So Class B and Class C office space is still very important. Trying to find a balance to strike there, I think is very, very crucial, as not to shut down a lot of small businesses that range from garment industry still to tech and other services for the idea of housing. So my question would be, there's been a lot of talk about this allowing commercial buildings to have the ability to turn residential. Now, does that mean fully residential and no more commercial? Or is there a possibility to do mixed use units? Now, the reason I bring this up is that I work with a lot of freelancers who have had to move out of the area to put their studios somewhere else. And I know a lot of folks, and they still have to come all the way into 38th Street to get stuff or to work with their clients. I know a ton of people that would absolutely love to have their work live space where you're able to have your sewing studio or design studios, things of that nature, that you could also live in. So I was wondering if that's actually something that the zoning laws would allow.
Thank you so much, Renee, for that information and also for your question. As I said earlier, creating a mixed-use community, doesn't just mean you have an office building and then a housing next door to it in a separate building. There are many opportunities in which you can blend those kinds of uses together within buildings, or even within a single unit within a building, such as, like, I think what you're describing here.
Yes, like consolidating rent, I guess, I think would be something a lot of people would be interested in.
Right. Yeah. Right. And that, that concept of live work is, we think a really intriguing and important one. It certainly is one of the things that we hope to explore as part of this process. As I said at the outset of this meeting, we're not coming tonight with specific recommendations right now. It's really important that we're hearing from people like you and about your situation and your priorities, and to really use those as we develop a plan for these neighborhoods. But the goal really is to create and foster mixed use communities in Midtown South, where you have the types of things that you're describing. You can have light manufacturing taking place together with housing, together with creative office space or fashion wholesaling, for example, that these things can all coexist together. And one thing that I'll say about the ability for these uses to coexist together, if you recall, the map that we showed earlier tonight showed the plan area, the area that we're looking at as part of this process, which is 4 kind of distinct areas that are separated from one another geographically, by several streets. We have looked at the areas surrounding this Midtown South planning area, areas that used to be manufacturing zoning, like Midtown South is today, where residential and housing was allowed through zoning change, and looked at those to see what happened when those zoning changes were introduced. Did new housing come to these areas, and did it replace former manufacturing space or former office space, for example? And the result of that work, that looking at these neighborhoods, indicated that by and large, housing was added to these neighborhoods, but it didn't come at the expense of existing non-residential, commercial, or manufacturing uses that were present in those neighborhoods. So we really do take that as a very positive sign that we can do something like introducing housing, for example, into these neighborhoods, and it will not cannibalize existing uses that are there today, that you really can end up with true mixed use communities. And you've seen that in the immediate vicinity of Midtown South. And we really do look forward to your continuing to engage in this process, and to hearing from you in upcoming engagement meetings. So thank you very much.
Eric, I actually just want to add one more thing to respond to Renee's question. We have another City of Yes initiative that's called Zoning for Economic Activity. And it's another citywide initiative that aims to modernize the city's zoning regulations to support small businesses and create thriving commercial corridors, and really bolster the city's economic recovery. And an example of one of the proposals within this initiative is that we would relax size limitations on home occupations and expand the types of occupations allowed, while maintaining noise and environmental rules, which will complement our Midtown South plan to allow housing in the area. And, you know, an expanded live work scenario here could be a great way to support and enhance the growing creative and tech sectors in the area, as well as the fashion industry, like you said.
Great. Thanks, Renee. You got a 2-for-1. You didn't even know that's what you're signing up for here. Everyone's excited. All right. Next up, we have Barbara Blair. If we can promote Barbara right now. Again, this can just take a couple of seconds to go through. Barbara, are you able to speak now? Barbara, can you hear us? You may have to unmute. Barbara, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Great, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I apologize. I
No
did want to,
worries.
first of all, thank DCP so much for taking on this challenge, but also this opportunity for this incredible neighborhood in the middle of New York City. And thank you, Council's member Powers and Botchers and Manhattan Borough President Levine. So we really embrace, I'm somebody who's worked in this neighborhood for many, many years, and we really embrace the idea of mixed use for a multitude of reasons, many of which have been mentioned on this call tonight, not the least of which, if we had a 24/7 presence of individuals using the neighborhood, I think you'd get a much better ground floor pedestrian experience in terms of what the retail is and the resiliency of retail in the neighborhood. The question that I want to ask, I have two questions. One is, when you are in a planning process, is there a point where you start talking about things like the density of the neighborhood, the pedestrian counts, how heavily trafficked it is, and what public improvements might be, both for more open space, but widening sidewalks, improving lighting and those kinds of things that would make it a more desirable physical environment for residential? And then my other question is, I know why you didn't include the area between 8th and 9th Avenues, but those buildings are essentially the same building stock, although they're not the same zoning as to the east of 8th Avenue. But, you know, it's the same building stock, and it also in 2005 had a sort of arbitrary zoning restriction placed on it that was a result of the Hudson Yards rezoning, that would only allow you to convert to residential or hotel if you were 70,000 square feet or under. And a lot of these buildings are in excess of 200,000 square feet. And I think maybe at the time we ended up in that neighborhood with all hotels. And hotels, you know, it's a great use, but there's still transitory users. It's not going to elevate the neighborhood in the way that residential would. So that's really what my question is will there be consideration for public realm improvements to accommodate residents and users, visitors and businesses, but then also any kind of treatment between 8th and 9th Avenue?
Hi, Barbara. Good to hear from you. Thanks for your questions. So to answer your first question, we will definitely, throughout this planning process, begin to talk more about density and sort of the quality of life issues and how to address them. We'll be doing the stakeholder roundtables as well as public office hours, where we really do want to hear from residents and businesses about what their priorities are for the area, what their sort of quality of life concerns and desires are for these neighborhoods. And based on what we learned during this process, where we will also be inviting our partner agencies like Department of Transportation and Department of Sanitation and a whole host of other agencies, the administration can then develop recommendations and approaches to focus on key local priorities. And, you know, part of that will also be city planning digging into more research and analysis to help inform that. For your second question, while we are focused on the manufacturing districts of Midtown South, as you saw in our plan area, the map that was shown during the presentation, we're focusing on these because they are the specific areas that do not provide any opportunities for housing today, generally. But I will note that the citywide City of Yes for Housing Opportunity initiative proposes to remove existing restrictions on housing within the C64M district, which is the area you were referencing, with the residential and floor area restrictions. So the City of Yes for Housing Opportunity is a complementary effort to this Midtown South mixed use plan that will hopefully address this exact question.
Okay, thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, Barbara and Nabila there. I'm just going to note, looking at the clock, we're almost at time at 8:30. So we have just a couple more questions in the Q&A box. We have a couple more hands raised. We're going to extend 15 minutes, make sure we can get through everyone who's already submitted a question or raised their hand, but we're not going to take any new questions at this time or comments at this time. All right, so moving back over to the Q&A questions submitted, we have first Kristen Kligerman, who wrote, will DCP identify the buildings best suited to residential conversion? Will building owners have incentives to convert?
Thank you, Kristen, for those questions. To be brief, city planning will not identify individual buildings that are best suited for residential conversion. As part of this initiative, we will be looking at the entirety of the plan area for opportunities for housing, and that includes possibilities for new construction of housing, which I think, as you saw, are relatively limited within this geography, and also the possibility of conversions. But as part of the planning effort, we will not be going and looking at specific buildings and assessing them for conversion potential. And as to if building owners will have incentives to convert, this was or in the past has been an aspect of state law that has provided conversion incentives, and there is always the possibility that the state could take that back up again to provide incentives for conversion of space of non-residential to residential space. We're at the early stage of this process, so we don't yet have specific recommendations as to where housing should be permitted within this geography, how it should be permitted, how much should be allowed. That really is a process to come following our engagement effort and what we hear and learn during that process. Thank you for your questions.
Thanks, Eric. Now we have a question from Andrew Stern saying, I think referring to an earlier question, going off of Ben's question, are there ways DCP can allow more businesses to open above the first floor? Many of my favorite stores and restaurants in this neighborhood are on the second or third floors, or often even higher. These spaces generally have lower rent than first floor retail and allow unique businesses to thrive. How can we ensure this continues with the residential conversions and new construction?
That's
Well,
a great. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Nabila. Go ahead.
That's a great question. So, you know, as you can see here, we are all about embracing the concept of this mixed use idea, and the city is doing a bunch of different initiatives to help enhance this. So as I mentioned earlier, the City of Yes for zoning for economic opportunity, which is similar to our citywide housing opportunity proposal, in that it's really trying to update and modernize our zoning resolution. It is proposing to make residential uses legal when they are located below commercial uses. So this actually makes mixed use conversion scenarios more possible. And so we're really excited for that proposal to be part of the City of Yes initiative, which will definitely be complementary to our Midtown South plan.
Great, thanks, Nabila. And we have our last three questions with hands or comments with hands raised. I see Paul Devlin, followed by Leila Lagisigo, and finally Tafadar Surov. I'm gonna call on Paul first, if we can promote Paul. Might take a moment. Paul, are you able to speak?
Yes, I am. Hi, everybody. Thanks for doing this. I'm Paul Devlin. I live in Hell's Kitchen. I co-chair the Hell's Kitchen Land Use Committee on Manhattan Community Board 4. So I'm familiar with a lot of the faces in the room. I'm really glad to be following Barbara Blair because a lot of my points sort of echo some of the concerns that were raised by Barbara. Notably that the Garment District had talked about a zoning text amendment, and Community Board 4 had sent a letter out talking about some of these issues very specifically, and that we're glad to see in this planning process as a commitment to permanently affordable housing. We often ask for an increase in the percentage of MIH from 30 to 40%, so we might want to consider higher percentages than what's currently the rule, because we have an opportunity to now. We really want to make sure that we focus in the areas on renovation and not demolition. We don't want to see the zone changes come into place and then all these buildings that have great character being demolished to put in new glass skyscrapers. I don't think there'd be an incentive for that given the FAR caps, but I just want to make sure that we have that incorporated into any language we use. As was discussed with Andy Stern earlier, the area is a lot overbuilt already. And so being able to make sure that we could have more density in residential and guarantee that that happens, even if it's above the 12 FAR, would be kind of critical. But we're not necessarily in favor of increasing the FAR in the area because, as we know, it's already overbuilt and the sidewalks are tight. There's been a lot of conversation tonight about the live-work situation. We strongly promote that. The McGraw-Hill building on 42nd Street is a great example of sort of how the base remained commercial and the upper floors was converted to residential. Given the footprint of the building and the design, it was a great model, and that model might be looked at very closely in terms of how we look at this area. The second big theme I want to talk about is the kind of the livability, and we've touched on it a bit, and Nabila, you've had a few good points on this. You know, we look at these four quadrants, but they are integrated, right? We have the Penn Station redevelopment right in the middle of it. We have areas to the west of that that are critical to those of us in Hell's Kitchen. And so I would suggest making sure that we look at bike paths and sanitation issues. Like we at Community Board 4 talk a lot about trash removal should be incorporated on the interiors of buildings, so we don't see piles of trash on the sidewalks. The sidewalks in this area are very dense and tight, so adding trash to sidewalks will make it even harder for people to navigate through. And bike usage is significantly higher. We want to make sure that we have access to that. And we talked a little bit about infrastructure and support services for residential. I mean, this comes into the livability factor in that We need schools when there are this many people here. We need emergency facilities. We need healthcare facilities. And I'd suggest that we look at that as a proactive step, as opposed to waiting for an environmental study to determine what school seats are needed. We know we're going to need school seats, so let's plan in advance. And if we maybe use some of the empty lots in the area, and the city could say those lots would be great for schools, for healthcare facilities, for police, fire, and all those other services that we need, and maybe take advantage of those empty lots. And finally, I'd just like to echo what Barbara Blair mentioned about the area between 8th and 9th and sort of west of these target zones. We have a severe housing need in those neighborhoods as well, and the building stock is very much the similar way. So even though it's zoned differently, and this is a target for manufacturing, I think if there's some way we can incorporate some language to allow more housing in those blocks as well, that would be appreciated. So thank you all very much. I appreciate the council members and the borough president being on this, and great to see all of you. Abby, you're doing a great job navigating us through all this Zoom too. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Paul. And agree, Abby's doing a fantastic job. So you touched on a lot of points, Paul. I'll try to get to all of them. But I'll say a number of the things that you outlined around livability or sanitation, quality of life. These are things that as you said, will come as part of the environmental review process. But also, I think it's really worth noting that when the city engages in a neighborhood planning study such as this really is the opportunity for agencies to come to the table to participate, and in a way that is pretty unique in our city, where you really are able to get kind of like a coordinated attention of city agencies and response from city agencies that can be identified as part of the engagement process, which, as you note, is something that comes before the environmental review process begins to do its analyses. So there's that. So a couple of, I think, important points to touch on affordability. Key component of any change to allow housing will be implementing MIH. You talked about going beyond the 25 to 30% that's outlined in MIH. I think the city is always looking for opportunities to maximize the amount of affordable housing that we can get as part of neighborhood planning efforts. MIH is a cornerstone of those efforts, but it is something that is really critically important that we apply consistently when we do implement it. So we, as a matter of really base policy, do not deviate from the base MIH program of the 25 to 30%. But where we do have opportunities is where we can work with our partner agencies such as HPD, where the city owns or controls sites. These are opportunities where we can go beyond what MIH provides, and we certainly will look for those opportunities as part of this planning effort. You highlighted the potential for demolition, replacing existing loft buildings, for example, with glassy skyscrapers. Really important part of the work that we're going to be engaged in together with the community, with stakeholders, is hearing from people about what type of development they would want to see come to these neighborhoods, and that will inform the building size, the building form that is eventually baked into zoning. I will say, from the work that has been done in the past in the Garment Center, I think there's been a really clear agreement between local community, elected officials, and this department that the loft context of these neighborhoods, these strong, very muscular, loft buildings that rise sheer from the sidewalk up to almost their full building height, they really define the character of the neighborhood. And a lot of the hotels that you've seen inserted into these neighborhoods that interrupt that really continuity of street wall is something that zoning has addressed in the Garment District in past actions. I really wouldn't be surprised if we we seek to extend that to other areas that have similar context in the study area as well. So in the interest of time, I'm going to move on. We'll have lots of opportunities to continue talking to you, Paul, throughout this process. Thank you very much.
Look forward to it. Thanks, guys.
Okay.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks, Paul. Very quickly, we've got our last two callers. The first one is Layla La Gisico. Layla, if we can promote Layla now. Layla, are you able to speak?
Yes, I am.
Great, go ahead.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you to DCP. Fantastic work. It's really exciting. My first comment will be to say everything that Paul says, Community Board 5 agrees. So thank you, Paul. Good to see you. I have a couple of questions and comments. My first question to probably to you, Eric, is we have seen other rezonings in CB5 that were similar to what you're proposing on a very much smaller scale. The Ladies Mile rezoning is comes to mind. It was an M5 district that, or maybe M6, converted to C648 that allows residential 10 FAR, can be bumped to 12 with affordable housing. And, it is celebrated as a true success, very, very successful, really saw all the goals of this rezoning basically take form. The one thing, though, that I would caution the DCP about is that we saw an increase in production of housing probably by 2 to 3-fold, 200 to 300% more housing units were produced in the area. But what we saw was also an increase in the cost of housing pretty much by the same and more. 300%, I would say, is the average that you saw the cost of housing going in this particular area. And I think it is really important to recognize that, supply is one component of, the housing condition, but supply is not the only one that drives the cost of housing. And certainly in CB5, it plays a very, very marginal role. On the contrary, the more you build, the higher the price gets. And we've seen it, that's a good example. It was a rezoning. We've seen it on Billionaires Row, where, you demolish, thousands of units on Billionaires Row. If you look at the census data, actually the population drops on those census tracts, and yet the cost of, quote unquote housing, gets multiplied by, 10, 20-fold. So given that there is, if I understand correctly, there is no mandate in the plan that you're thinking about right now, how do you guarantee that the market will be conducive to actually supporting the creation of affordable housing? And my follow-up question to this question, because I kind of know your answer, is would you actually consider a mandate for affordable housing rather than leaving it to the developers to decide if indeed they want to build rental, and if indeed they want more density, and if indeed that will trickle in affordable housing?
Thanks, Layla, and great to see you and to continue talking to you about this. Just really quickly, so the Ladies Mile example that you highlighted, it is one of the areas that we did look at that I was talking about earlier to see what happened following that rezoning, and I think we were encouraged to see that housing was introduced into the area and didn't come at the expense of the uses that were there that were so valuable prior to the rezoning. I think you're absolutely right that the simply building housing is not going to be the only solution to addressing housing affordability. Again, we think it's really key that where we can do it, we must do it to address the housing crisis. But just to correct one thing that I may not have been completely clear on earlier, because these areas are manufacturing districts today that do not permit housing, any change that that changes that introduces the ability to build housing in these areas comes automatically with mandatory inclusionary housing being mapped here. And that mandatory inclusionary housing will apply to new construction, to conversions of existing buildings, and to enlargements. So the mandate would be put into place here if we do end up at the end of this process permitting housing in Midtown South. MIH will apply, and it will it will mandate housing in all circumstances where housing could be introduced here. So very, we think a very important and positive step. Yeah, and I'm sorry for all the flashing on the screen. I think somebody just came through and turned off all the lights in our office. So.
And it's a good sign that we've got to move on to our last question.
Thank you, Layla.
All right, our final question or comment comes from Tafadar Surov, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name. Please correct us if we can promote Tafadar now. Tafadar, can you speak?
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Hi. Yeah, that was fine. And thank you for the opportunity and for extending this session so that I could get my say in, and for everybody else. I know we don't have too much time, so I'm going to just be quick with it. So my name is Tafadar. I'm a construction worker. I'm a union member. And as a member of Laborers Local 79 and an organizer, I represent 10,000 construction laborers throughout our city who do the hard work of building everything from housing to schools to airports, infrastructure, everything else that we need to make our city run. The reason why I'm speaking today is because Midtown is an area where construction workers have typically had jobs for forever, where we were able to make middle-class wages with health insurance and pensions. You don't really have a lot of places where you get that anymore. Typically for a workforce where people might not have a college degree and little to no education, but still able to work with their hands and make an honest living. I think there's an issue in our city where when there's rezonings, there's typically no standards attached relating to wages, employment, labor standards, safety on construction sites, and that creates a problem for a lot of communities. Like the one that I come from, I live in the Bronx, and we have a lot of construction workers that come from our communities here, also from Queens, Brooklyn, who go out to rezoned parts of the cities and build. And when that happens, wages, they tend to be depressed by companies that are taking advantage of the fact that there are no standards attached to rezoning plans and using it to get away with paying workers minimum wage with no sort of health insurance or benefits, and on dangerous job sites where, at the end of it all, elected officials and whoever else might come for ribbon cuttings that are, nice and enjoyable and whatnot, but workers have died on some of these sites, and we don't forget each other because we're a tight community. Which is why I'm speaking up. I think that we have a real chance to make sure that in the guidelines that come with this rezoning, there can be good labor standards attached. I think at the core of it, there's a way to have a workaround so that when we're talking about good wages for construction workers, it's not going to be obstructive towards the goals of building affordable housing and, achieving the price points of deeply affordable housing, as we know that our city needs. Myself, I'm a person that has had to move around different parts of the city in the search for affordable housing, getting priced out of one part of the city to another. And I think that's a story that a lot of people in our city relate to, particularly construction workers. And I think one of the creative workarounds that's emerging in a lot of the rezonings that are happening in the city right now, like with Atlantic Avenue mixed use plan, Queens comprehensive community plan, the Bronx Metro North rezoning plan, there's a lot of discussions and excitement amongst community members about the prospect of setting a wage floor of $40 an hour for construction workers, as well as mandating community hiring on local construction projects, so that when we're building housing, commercial space, and whatever else, we're also making sure that there's a reinvestment happening in communities where people are coming to do the work of putting these buildings up and whatever other structures. That's all I wanted to say. And, thank you guys for putting this event together and getting this kicked off and making sure that our city is going to be building its way out of a housing crisis that we very much need to put an end to. Have a good night.
Thank you very much, Tafadar, and you get the last word for the evening. But I really do appreciate your perspective and adding your voice to this. I think the things you highlight are undeniably important. Making sure people have a good wage, not just a living wage, but a good wage. And I think as we've said several times tonight, zoning is one tool to that we can use to achieve a specific purpose, but this planning effort that we're engaged in, goes beyond just zoning, and it allows for us to have these more wide-ranging conversations that do go beyond zoning, that allows to bring other agencies to the table, elected officials, and those that can affect change in conjunction with a neighborhood planning effort. So what I'll say is, this falls into the category of, we don't have the answer tonight to this, but, to really encourage you to continue to participate in this process. And that, we do look forward to hearing more from you and your colleagues as we continue this planning effort. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, and as you can see from those of us who are in the dark now, we are a little over 20 minutes over time. So we're gonna need to leave comments and questions there for tonight. Thank you everyone for your time, interest, and thoughtful comments and questions this evening. Let's go over next steps from here. We at DCP rely on your input and feedback to build a successful MSMX plan. There are several ways to stay involved, all of which can be found on the MSMX website, which is MidtownSouthPlan.nyc. We encourage you to share the recording of this video, which will be posted online, both on DCP's YouTube page and on the MSMX Plan's website. We highly encourage you to subscribe on our website for updates on the engagement process. This is the best way to stay informed on all things MSMX. You will also be able to register for public events and office hours in the future. Email us at MidtownSouthPlan@planning.nyc.gov. And most importantly, take our survey. You can access the survey by scanning the QR code on the screen or by visiting our website. Again, MidtownSouthPlan.nyc. And that concludes our program for tonight. On behalf of the entire MSMX team, thank you again to everyone for joining us this evening. And we're looking forward to your continued involvement in the planning process for the MSMX plan. Good night.